Hi there. The International Committee of the Red Cross, or ICRC, is dedicated to humanitarian concerns around the globe and works constantly to improve people's conditions. China, though not a former member of the ICRC, has been increasingly involved in international campaigns of humanitarian relief as a major responsible stakeholder of the United Nations. Today, I'm very happy to be joined by Monsieur Jacques Pellet, the ICRC Special Envoy for China. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Welcome to Dialogue, sir.
Thank you for the invitation.
For the very first time, humanitarian relief has been written into the government work report that was delivered by Premier Li Keqiang at the opening ceremony of just concluded National People's Congress, a very important annual political event. What do you make of the attention and importance that the Chinese government attaches to our humanitarian relief and the campaign as such in the world at large?
Definitely we see China much more involved in many issues which are very close to the work we are doing as a humanitarian organization. We see, for instance, China much more involved in peace and security issues, like for instance in Africa. We see the number of Chinese peacekeepers increasing.
35,000 of them, the biggest number that any of the P5 of the Security Council make.
Yeah, exactly. Today China is the first contributor among the P5. And last year in November, your ambassador in the Security Council organized an open debate on peace and security in Africa. He invited the ICRC to be part of the discussion. So we see this very positive new positioning of China, and we think that we have a lot of common interest to work more together. That's why the president of the ICRC decided to have a push on our relation with China. And my job, my work, is to try to connect my organization much better with China. Here in Beijing, in China, in the Boao Forum, but also in the field in Africa, in Asia, or in the Middle East, in New York, in Brussels. We have so many things to speak together, and I hope I can later on be more precise on this. But we see a big prospect, a big potential in the relation between.
Thank you very much for the positive comments on the work that the Chinese authorities have done. So far, much needs to be done to further explore the good sides of our institutions, including our political will and vision to be more involved in humanitarian missions the world over. Having said this, you mentioned ICRC, the International Committee of Red Cross. The phrase the Red Cross is, of course, deeply rooted in our daily vocabulary about public products and public services that we can offer to the rest of the world. But let me know more about the history of ICRC. Let's begin with, for example, a marble statue outside the headquarters of ICRC in Geneva, Switzerland. Yes. The name is inscribed in the marble is Henry Dunant. Okay. He's the first laureate of he's the first laureate of a Nobel Peace Prize. I was impressed by his story. Tell us more about the touching story.
It's a very incredible story. You know that Henri Dunant was a businessman. He was a businessman. That's why I'm very happy to be here in Boao, where there are so many businesses.
But ironically, he ended up being in a hospital and nursing home by the end of his life.
Yes, he has a period of fame. And then the last part of his life was more difficult. But what the story in a nutshell is that he was a businessman in Algeria, was a French colony at that time in the 1860s. He wanted to speak to Napoleon III because he couldn't expand his business. So he went to Paris, and when he was in Paris, the people said, no, sorry, Napoleon III is in Italy, he's making war. So he went to Italy, he went to this place, Solferino, and he arrived a day after the end of this war, which was a bloody war, and he saw many people dying in front of him because nobody was taking care.
So many people bleeding and dying in front of him in the battlefield.
So he said, how come? Even if he was a businessman, he was first of all a human being. And he said, how can we help those people? So he tried to help these people under very difficulty with some volunteers. And then he went back to Switzerland and he wrote a book Souvenir de Solferino. And then the book was so appealing that he succeeded in convincing most of the European head of state at that period to come to Geneva in 1864 and to sign the first Geneva Convention, which protects the wounded, the wounded of war. And his idea was, instead of facing such dramatic situation, we should prepare in advance. Every country should be prepared in advance, that in case there is a war, we are able to bring support to the wounded and to the sick people. And that was the first success. As you know, then there was the second, third, fourth Convention of Geneva, and that was signed, the fourth convention was signed in 1949. So today, this year it's the 70th anniversary of the Geneva Conventions. And China has ratified, it's the most universally ratified convention, and China is part of one of the countries who signed, ratified the 4 conventions.
The way Mr. Henry Dunant used his wealth is very impressive, because it has a lot to do with the spirit of philanthropy, charity, and of course the spirit of international humanitarianism. It reminds me of yet another humanitarian worker who also won the Nobel Peace Prize, Teresa. Her name was also inscribed in the headquarters of the Nobel Peace Prize in Oslo, Norway. Have you heard of her story?
Yes, I think we have many, what Henri Dunant did is to behave as a human being, and there are so many examples in the world coming from different cultures, different places of the world, of people who have just the strong feeling of human dignity, and the fact that the person in face of you, even if he's your enemy, he's a human being, and you cannot treat people badly. You cannot treat people in a non-human way. And even you see that when there is a war, the military men, because we have a lot of interaction, exchanges with military men, they know it better than the politicians. They know that the way you treat your enemy can make future peace impossible or possible. It depends on the way to.
Jacques, you spoke of your missions in some of the war-torn countries like Afghanistan and Syria. However, the issue is how difficult it was to persuade parties in the conflicts to let you step in and separate the troops from a neutral zone so that you could help save the wounded soldiers and treat the war dead in a decent way. Was it a difficult job? I mean, could the hostile sides let you, the neutral party, step in under very adverse and dangerous circumstances?
Yeah. I think it's the product of a long history. We have been known, we have been active since 156 years. So we have this credibility. I'm not saying that it's easy, but first of all, we never work in a places if the government is not accepting us. So where we work, we have an agreement. But then, usually, those governments, they let us have contact with the others, the opponents, because they know that we have those kind of contacts for a purely humanitarian objective, which is to have access to the people. And we need security guarantee from those non-state armed groups, as we call them, the different parties. And we have to negotiate constantly with those people. We have to know them. We have to be close to the people. That's why we have, for instance, in Africa, we have 5,000 people working in Africa. And so we have to network. The problem we are facing today is, before it was quite easy. You have the national army, for instance, and the opposition. But now it's very fragmented. For instance, in Syria, we were up to 80 different groups. So for us, it's very difficult to know who is friend with who, and those alliances could change very quickly. So when you cross a checkpoint, because you have some humanitarian assistance to bring to the people, and you have in front of you someone who has a gun, and you don't exactly know who he is, so that starts to be very dangerous.
Yeah, the ragtags of the parties involved in the conflict will be very difficult to recognize. Yeah. You have made the point very clear. The issue is, inevitably, you're going to have some heavy casualties. Tell us more about the disasters that you went through. Some of your workers may have been killed indiscriminately in Afghanistan, in the hospitals, in bombing. And sometimes the hospitals were abused and used as a human shield by terrorists and by armed parties. Did you realize that this kind of dangers exist constantly?
You know, it's a daily challenge for the organization. Unfortunately, we have casualties. We have kidnapped people. Most of the time we can release them quite quickly, but we have, as you know, we have casualties more or less every year. To be honest, we don't see the trend is not going up, so it's still. But as I mentioned, as the groups are more and more fragmented, it's the pressure on our staff is more and more, you know, strong, because for the reason I was saying, it's difficult to know who is who. So the pressure of security is even bigger than before, but we make the utmost effort to know exactly where we are, to know exactly what we do. And we would like to have a zero risk, but you know, unfortunately it's difficult.
Are you suggesting quietly that those who are willing to work for ICRC will have to write something to promise that they are ready to die for a cause they respect?
We may not say things like this, but I think that if you take the decision to go for in some places today where there is very difficult conflict, there is a risk. So there is no zero risk, but the duty of the organization is to minimize at the maximum this. But it asks, so we have a networking, you know, we are doing networking in many places to know exactly where we are, who are the people around us.
You have to do the feasibility studies very carefully before you step into the dangerous circumstances. Why? You always have some people in the world who want to devote their life. They would rather die to save lives of the wounded and the innocent people. Does that have a lot to do with their religious beliefs, good faith? What is it that serves as the motivation and driving force behind their decent behavior?
I think that we are, you know, the security of our staff is one of the priorities. We will never ask the staff to be a hero. We want our staff to be professional. We want our staff to take the minimum of risk, even if the situation is risky. We want to ensure that you know, our acceptance is real. We want the people able to work, but we will never ask any people to be a hero. There is a lot of examples of ICRC delegates who behave very bravely, but I think this is maybe when you are in the situation, you take some decision. You never know where it comes from. It comes from your inside. But as you know, being in the management of this organization, the duty of the organization is to make sure that we have the right information, the right decision taken, and avoid this kind of situation. And if one of our colleagues is, for instance, kidnapped, we will never ask him to be a hero, and we want him to be back safe home.
Thank you, Jacques. You are watching Dialogue with Monsieur Jacques Pellet. He is a special envoy for China International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC. We've been discussing the spirit of international humanitarianism, and when we come back after the break, we'll talk more about what China has done and what we would be doing in the future as a responsible member of the international society, particularly in the context of ICRC. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back, sir. Let's continue our discussion about the role China plays as a major responsible stakeholder of the international society. The Red Cross Society of China is so far, for one reason or another, not a formal member of ICRC. You may correct me, but we have been involved closely in humanitarian movements and campaigns. What has China done? Let us know more, please.
Yeah. Maybe, first of all, I may say that, the Red Cross family, what we call the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement, it's like every family is quite a complicated movement. So we have the ICRC, as I mentioned, the first organization in 1863, and then we have national societies like the one in China. We have 190 national societies, so more or less every country in the world has its own national societies. And then we have the International Federation, also based in Geneva. So we have three components. The federation is leading for natural disaster, like for instance today in Mozambique, or when we have a big cyclone or earthquake. We are leading the movement where there is conflict, violence. So the Chinese Red Cross, which was, according to my knowledge, founded in 1912, a long time ago.
1904.
1904, sorry. So 1904, so it has a very long history. And since we have opened an office in Beijing in 2005, we are constantly developing our relation with Chinese Red Cross. And its president, Mr. Chen Zhu, is very famous in your country. He has been a former Ministry for Health. So we are trying to work more together, and also we are ready to go with the Chinese Red Cross abroad, not only in China, but what can we do together in some places. So this year we have invited the Chinese Red Cross to make a field trip in Democratic Republic of Congo, for 9 days to look at what we are doing. So we hope that in the future we can have a strong cooperation in places of interest for the Chinese Red Cross and also for the ICRC. So, and we have recently signed an agreement with the Chinese Red Cross. We also would like to have more Chinese staff in our organization. We have more than 130 different nationalities, but still very few Chinese staff. So it's also something I use your CGTN to. I hope in the future we will have more young men, young women from China eager to come to help the ICRC.
Jacques, tell us more, if you could, about whether you were involved in the relief work of 10 years ago when the devastating earthquake took place in Wenchuan, Sichuan province, which killed up to 90,000 people, including 10,000 missing. Your work, to my knowledge, is not just confined to the war zone. You could also be a very active participant in any forms of a disaster relief the world over.
We can, obviously, if there is a natural disaster and we are present in the country, we are ready to help. But it needs the government of the country to need our help. In some places, for instance, the government prefer to organize the rescue by itself because they consider they have the means to do it. And
where does the fund come to support the operations of ICRC financially?
95% of the budget of the ICRC is coming from states, from governments. And this is a very mysterious balance because we are really perceived as a neutral, impartial organization, but nevertheless, our budget is coming from states. And
do you have any compulsory data for each and every individual member states of the United Nations to make their due contributions?
Yeah, but states are not members of the ICRC. The ICRC is a private.
How many members do you have?
We don't have members. It's a Swiss private status company, international company, because we are an international organization because we have the mandate for the international humanitarian law, the Geneva Conventions, signed and ratified by countries. So we are a diplomatic international organization, but our status is Swiss. So the governance of the ICRC is Swiss, but the funding is coming from states. But to be honest, we have 20 states who provide the vast majority of the budget. And one of the things we would like to achieve with China is not only to have a strong political support from China, because the voice of China is very important, And as you know, international humanitarian law is violated every day, so we need strong states who speak in the behalf of IHL, but we also would like China to increase its financial support to the ASEAN.
Given the benevolent and the philanthropic nature of ICRC, and which is a private organization based in Geneva, do you work in close partnership with organizations such as WHO and UNICEF?
We are working very closely with the United Nations system, because very often we are working in the same context. So, and you know, here in Boao Forum, we have also the High Commissioner for Refugees, Mr. Grandi, and I'm very pleased to share a panel with him tomorrow. So we are very close, but we keep independent from the UN system. And this is very important for our impartiality, neutrality. So, so we are, and that's the fact that we have no members, states are no members, states are supporters or not of the ICRC.
Under extreme circumstances, let me go back to the issue of children casualties, because in the 1950s and 10 years later, you had the Children's Rights Declaration and Convention about Children's Rights. And each year on May the 8th, you have this day for Red Cross. Women and children were easier targets for conflicts. And you often see violations of the Geneva Convention about humanitarianism. What would you do under such circumstances? Because the children and women hospitals are likely to be used by militias in the conflicts as a human shield.
Yeah, that the case does happen. But what it is more frequent is that hospitals are bombing only because they are hospitals. So today, I can tell you that in many places where you have the highest conflict, like in Syria or in Yemen, hospitals have been bombing. And you know, when we see an hospital bombed, we always think about the people inside the hospital who might be killed.
A hospital in Afghanistan was also destroyed, along with all the medical workers, perhaps from your organization.
But you know, we made a survey in an hospital who was destroyed in Yemen. It's 200,000 people who have no access to health services. So
and children don't have any access to education.
Education, it's a very interesting issue. It's a very important issue. You know, we, the ICRC, as we very often are we are the only organization present in the most remote places. We have to answer to the needs. So the first need is water, then food, then shelter, then sanitation, and now we are really looking at education, because you know, in most of the places where we are confronted to what we call protracted conflict. Conflict never ends, and the average time a refugee is in a camp is 17 years. So what does it mean for a child to be 4-year-old and be trapped in a conflict situation for 10 years without access to education? So with the ICRC, we would like to have a look at it. We want to work with other organizations. We want to give an answer to these big challenges. But you know, traditionally speaking, humanitarian organizations like the ICRC, we were not looking at education. But nowadays, we really seriously look at it. We are also seriously looking at mental disease and mental consequences of conflict. When you see those kids confronting with violence, what does it mean in terms of consequences for their psychological balance for the future? So we are also investing a lot of research, a lot of action, and we have big programs to answer those needs. Needs of you know, of civilians are evolving very fastly, and we have to adapt to this new situation.
China remains a big developing country. Well, this is a controversial case for Westerners. At the same time, we are exporting human resources, technology, and overcapacity of infrastructure building along the stretches of the BRI, Belt and Road Initiative. What can China do to help with education, sanitation, Medicare, or even products for humanitarian relief?
I think we need just to know each other much better than we do. I will take a very positive example. We recently, last month or 2 months ago, we achieved a water supply project in northeast of Nigeria, which is quite also a difficult place. And for the first time with the ICRC, we contracted with a Chinese company. Mm-hmm. And this project, for a company, it's not necessarily a big market. It was 3 million Swiss francs. But with those 3 million Swiss francs, we now are supplying water for 150,000 people. Clean water in a very remote places. And we've done that for the first time with the Chinese companies. So one of the messages I would have is to call for the Chinese companies to come to us, and we have to go to them, but to better understand each other and find the places where we can have this, very positive experience of bringing services to the people. You have how many companies in Africa? You have more than 1 million Chinese working in Africa. We have 40% of what we're doing worldwide is in Africa. We have 5,000 people working in Africa. We are in many places where there are Chinese companies. So we need to connect. And also we have an initiative towards the Chinese companies is, as a humanitarian organization, we are not against company making business in conflict settings. But the way you do your business can help to mitigate the situation, or on the contrary, to make the situation worse. So we have developed best practices. We have been translated this in Chinese, and now yesterday we signed an agreement with one of the China Chamber of Commerce for extractive.
Thank you very much, Jacques. What you do here does deserve credit and commands great respect from the Chinese audiences. You are part of our job to address the needs. For that, you are saluted by the Chinese society, and I believe the loyal following of our program. I appreciate your job.
Thank you for your invitation.